So let's get started. Thank you so much for coming to this event, which is hosted by DEMINOVA Lab here at Aarhus University and also by Social Movement Studies Journal. And you can find information on all the DEMINOVA events on our webpage. It's DEMINOVA with one M and one N. They're all open to the public. They're all free to join, and they're all available to join online. And today we are discussing the most recent special issue of Social Movement Studies, which is called Reimagining Democracy, Legacy, Impact, and Lessons of Spain's 15M Movement. This special issue brings together the work of 20 scholars in 9 different articles, and we're really delighted to have some of them with us today. I'm going to let each of them briefly introduce themselves and just say a few words about their article's research so we can orient ourselves a bit before we start getting into our discussion. So we will start with Carlos Diz, and then Fabiola Mota, Kerman Calvo, Lucía del Moral Espín, Patricia García Vespín, and Ramón Fenstra. So Carlos, if you want to start.
Yeah, thank you, Cristina. Buenas tardes, muchas gracias. My name is Carlos Diz. I'm a sociologist and anthropologist from the University of A Coruña in Spain. And thanks again, Cristina and the other colleagues. It's a pleasure to be part of this special issue and to participate in this seminar with all of you. Well, our paper explores the mutual aid groups, los GAM, los grupos de apoyo mutuo, that emerged during the Corona lockdown in 2020 in A Coruña, based on the idea of the encounter. The GAM created neighborhood support networks and redefined what they were living. They gave another name to the pandemic, as 50M or 15M gave another name to the financial crisis. No es una estafa, no es una crisis, perdón, es una estafa. It was no longer just a biomedical issue, but a matter of care. They managed to introduce care where there was only fear, mistrust, and obedience. It was not just a question of technicians and experts, but an opportunity to self-organize, to support each other, and to create other possible relations with the world. In a context of emergency and uncertainty, the same context as today surrounds the climate issue and life in common on the planet, the GAM invite us to reimagine a caring democracy, one that is capable of detecting the needs of all its members and of distributing responsibilities from the standpoint of ethical, political, and relational commitment. In a sense, we believe that the GAM not only care for the most vulnerable bodies, asymmetrically affected by the pandemic according to class, of course, age, ability, gender, race, and so on, but by caring for the life in common and its sustainability in catastrophic times, they also care by extension for politics and democracy itself. By placing vulnerability and interdependence at the center of their discourses and practices, they reinforce the feminist ethics of care that has expanded over the last decade. For us, the GAM recycled in the lockdown the spirit of democratic and political experimentation of the Indignados movement. In fact, the origin of the GAM is related to the municipalist policies or municipalismo of the Marea Atlántica in the City Council of A Coruña, which governed the city between 2015 and 2019, counting among its representatives people from the 50M. Although the GAM were joined by all kinds of participants, ordinary citizens in a diverse and precarious alliance, volunteers, activists, neighbors, anarchists, nationalists, people with and without experience in politics, young and old people, affiliates and critics also of the Marea Atlántica. Their birth is true that was the result of this ecosystem of democratic innovation that claimed to be the heir of the Indignados. So basically, in this paper, we argue that the concept of caring democracy that we propose should be reassembled or put together with the idea of this power of anyone, no? May help us to think about sustaining lives that are hard to lead and about implied forms of life in common through which democracy can be reimagined. The way of caring about and for anyone that emerged from the GAM is an ethical and political engagement set apart from welfarism. Indeed, The GAM do not deny it either, but rather propose radical democratization through collective engagement practices and entanglement of socio-material intervention, that is, a material vital doing expressed in concrete practices such as mask making, sewing, counseling and therapeutical listening, digital mapping, collecting and distributing money and food through resistance funds, housing, and so on and so forth. In the lockdown, they approached democracy as a condition of possibility to address the problem of our time through more egalitarian compositions. We consider that this kind of collective experimentation, similar to that of the 50M and the municipalist turn, contains important elements that will allow us, we hope, to rethink social movements in these uncertain and turbulent and catastrophic times. Thank you.
I am lecturer of political science at the Universidad Autónoma de Madrid in Spain. So I am a political scientist. And my main concern when studying social movements is the political impact of social movement. But first, let me congratulate you, Cristina and Ramon, for the release of this special issue. Thank you for having me in this webinar. My contributions got the title of Transforming Urban Democracies through Social Movements, the Experience of Ahora Madrid, and it was written together with Michal Janowska. We both coordinated a research project carried out from 2016 to 2019 in Madrid. Well, in fact, this research intended to study the political shifts and policy reforms introduced by the so-called Ayuntamientos del Cambio in Spain. But in this paper, we focus in the experience of Ahora Madrid. Let's remember, Ahora Madrid was a citizen electoral platform. We argue it was a movement party which came out of the 15F movement in Madrid. In this article, we ask about how and to what extent Ahora Madrid translated the 15M movement's democratizing practices and expectation for democratic change into concrete policies. Our starting points rests on the concept of transferable innovations, according to the definition of Taylor and McAdam. So we tried to empirically identify new forms of collective action and ideational framework introduced by the 15F movement, which may trace from the protest cycle to the electoral stage and further to the governance process. By the way, in this regard, was crucial the investigation of Cristina, published in her book Reloaded Democracy, because it allowed us to establish a clear and direct connection between protest and institutional politics. The analysis largely relies on empirical data collected through face-to-face interview with activists, representatives of civic association, local councillors, and so on. And we analyzed the main democratic innovations for citizen participation implemented by Ahora Madrid and their connections with the various traditions and ideational frameworks for collective action coexisting within the movement. The main findings show that these different forms of collective actions, I would say cultures for social mobilization, also conveyed diverging visions of citizen participation and how to achieve real democracy. As a consequence, we found out, or we argue, that Ahora Madrid's participatory policies were changed and adapted over time in response to cross pressures from 15M collective actors. Our research finds out the coexistence of three mutually exclusive and conflicting positions on the design and implementation of participatory mechanism to regenerate urban democracy. And we argue that the coexistence of these three mutually exclusive and conflicting positions regarding the strategies and the policies to transform urban democracy helps to explain the failure of two phenomena, of two phenomena. First, the institutionalization of Ahora Madrid, but also the implementation of a coherent model of participatory governance, able to cope with the inherited neoliberal urban regime in Madrid. So we conclude, or our analysis concludes pointing at the internal features of social movements, which may be essential to account for their political consequences and the policy impact they can truly achieve. And that's all. Thank you.
Germán.
Okay, thanks so much, Christina. It's wonderful, really to be here. I'm going to be brief in my presentation because I think we are going to have the chance to talk about some features of my paper later on in these questions. I'm Germán Calvo, and I've written a piece with Aitor Romeo. And unfortunately, we are the pessimistics here. So we are not actually talking on the positive legacies of the Movimiento 15M, but unfortunately, we are talking broadly about repression. No, you know that other people would like to present repression as the social control of protests, but actually we are talking about what happened in terms of negative responses by the state against the Movimiento 15M and generally against anti-austerity, the cycle of anti-austerity protests. So basically, what we argue is that one of the unintended consequences of this form of mobilization was the stepping up in repression by conservative forces, not just the conservative government, but the conservative government's social and cultural allies in the media and in other sectors of society, including the police. And we basically argue that and the movement provided an opportunity. And I think perhaps it's very tough to present it like this way, because obviously the Movimiento 15M provided opportunities for a lot of positive outcomes. But in this particular case, in a country that was already very keen on penal populism, so where the penalization of politics was already ongoing, this particular form of mobilization with the features of against a counter-hegemony provided an opportunity for criminalization, securitization, and new forms of policing. So this is what we discussed, and we engage with debates in socio-legal studies and criminology to try to broaden the conversation and said, well, yes, the movement had obvious and very positive consequences on democracy, and I think we are going to discuss them in this conversation, but unfortunately there were other unintended and not so positive consequences that needs to be explored. And I work in at the University of Salamanca, and Aitor Romeo is based in Murcia. Thanks so much for the invitation, Cristina.
Thank you, Germán. Lucía.
Good afternoon, buenas tardes. Great to be here with all of you. Thank you to Cristina and all the people who has made this possible. I'm Lucía del Moral. I'm a political scientist and lecturer of sociology at the University of Cádiz. Greetings and also apologies from my co-author, Astrid Ajenjo, of the University Pablo de Olavide, and Raquel Clemente from a cooperative, Terminando, who can't be here today. Let me just say a few words of our work. It addresses, or we address, the dialogues between 15M movement and the feminist economic spaces. When we talk about feminist economics, we refer both to a heterodox economic thought, but also to a proposal for political action. This is a political roadmap. We all know that this is a permanent issue within feminism. However, feminist and Latin American feminist economies have become more politicized and critical, maybe more permeable and interconnected with social movements that other academic fields and other feminist economics perspective in other regions or countries. Within this framework, our paper explores the relationships between the articulation of the 15M movement in Spain, and the expansion of feminist economic at the feminist basis of this movement, in particular, en las comisiones prefeministas del 15M. Our methodologies included interviews, key informant, document analysis, questionnaires, informal and informal observation, and direct participation on these processes and events. And what the analysis shows is that within this crisis context, there has been a back and forward process in the relations between feminist economics and these committees. On the one hand, these committees not only incorporate and disseminated feminist economic concepts and knowledge and explanations through workshops, artistic interventions, and collective reflection process and learning spaces, but also produce knowledge from within people, and particularly from within women's everyday experience. This work was not done without difficulties and conflicts. We can say that feminist committees, the Comisiones Feministas, were counter-hegemonic groups within 15M. Meanwhile, feminist economics have been increasingly permeable and overlap with knowledge, demand, practices generated by social movements. Exploring the evolution of feminist economics conference is helpful to address this reciprocal influence. The conference from 2011 changed the trajectory to a clearly more political one. They explicitly opened the discourses and practices that exceeded the strictly academic sphere, becoming to some extent less university and more linked to feminist movements, social movements in general, and social and solidarity economy. From 2013, they were organized around 3 branches: research, including both academic and activist research; second branch, workshop, theoretical, academical, but also practical experiences; and the third branch, political debate or social action, which was intended to strengthen the networks and generate policy proposals. They also included spaces for democratic meeting, artistic intervention, and an important and big assembly. Moreover, there was an evident increase in the number and diversity of the themes and emerging topics connected to socioeconomic activities. To finish, our conclusions are that the political character of feminist economics and the activist and academic multi-belonging on many feminist economics has been a crucial link, but also never an easy road, between the 15M movement and the Feminist Economic Conference. We assert that these dialogues and this permeability are due, but also has reinforced feminist economics' capacity to explore the multidimensionality of what was at first considered just an economic financial crisis, to analyze the effects and problematize the austerity measures on the basis of the thinking of the sustainability of life, and to generate a theoretical framework intertwined with the struggles around politics of care and this idea of sustainability of life. This is, for example, housing movement, universal basic income, and domestic work, among others. In a few words, the capacity to unveil capital life conflicts, while austerity policies place capital before life, the works of feminist economic, the work of feminist committees, Comisiones Feministas, always claim for putting life before capital. Thank you.
Great, thank you. Patricia.
Hi. Well, thank you so much, Cristina and colleagues, for organizing this webinar and the special issue and so. My name is Patricia García Espín, and I am professor of political sociology in the University of Granada. I am presenting here a paper called The Mobilizing Memory of the 15M Movement, which I wrote with a friend and colleague, Manuel Jiménez Sánchez, that who unfortunately couldn't be here today. Well, I'm going to do a very brief summary of the paper, or at least the main points of the paper, in my view. In our work, we wanted to explore the effects of the 15M movement in the protest culture. However, we had the opportunity to explore these effects in a broader public. That is, most of the studies in this field had addressed the impacts on the protest culture of activists. So we had the opportunity to see these impacts or these effects on a broader public of less committed participants or even ordinary citizens who never went to any 15M event. Why I say that this was an opportunity that we had? Because we had in that moment 44 interviews of ordinary demonstrators in the most relevant demonstrations in 2011 and 2019, which were the pensioners movement and the 8th of March demonstrations. So we had 44 interviews with ordinary demonstrators who were not activists, just people who went to demonstrations at some point. But as we were analyzing the interviews, we saw that they had such relevant memories and recollections regarding the 15M. They were always talking about the 15M, even when we were asking about different demonstrations. So we said, okay, we have a really nice material to think about impacts of the 15M movement, even if it was not our main question at that moment. So what do we see in these interviews? Apart from all these recollections and memories, we saw that these ordinary demonstrators connected their memories of the 15M movement to subjective changes in their political positions, to changes in their subjectivities, to changes in their views of protests, specifically in 4 aspects. First, regarding the efficacy of protest. After 15M, they started to think that protest was a good thing, was not something to be totally banned, something respectable, but also a good way to have an impact on politics. So many of them suffered or experimented this change. Secondly, they had many learnings in terms of protest repertoires. For example, campouts or seats in public squares were unknown for many, many people before 15M. Thirdly, a new awareness regarding some political problems. For example, the problem of housing, which is not seen, which is seen differently after 15M movement. And finally, the discovery, we call it the discovery of a new political subject. I mean, the awareness of recognizing a new group of people who is acting, who are developing an active citizenship in terms of protest. So this ordinary demonstrator discovered this new political subject just looking at the 15M, even in cases in which they did not participate in any 15M event. So that is why we decided to redefine or to use and redefine this concept of mobilizing memory, because all these interviewees had a memory of the 15M and it was explicitly connected to their subjective changes afterwards. And I think that's the main point of the paper. Thanks.
Fascinating. Thank you so much. Ramon, do you want to say something about our paper?
Yes, thanks, Cristina. Well, thanks, first of all, Cristina, for organizing this nice event. And thanks as well to all the authors for all the great job they did on the articles. It's the first time we see each other, well, through the camera now, where we know Germán for before, obviously, but it's nice to see you. And please, I would like to apologize well if we were very, very strict with some of the rules with the editing processes at the end. I think with the graphics and the figures with Lucia, we have been sending different emails before. Well, I think the main idea that Cristina and I'm Ramon Fenstra, I'm associate professor of political theory at the Universidad Jaume I of Castellón, Spain. And I have been working with Cristina on this paper, well, and in many other projects before as well. And I think one of the ideas of the paper, but Cristina, please correct me if I'm wrong, was to think a bit more on the idea of laboratory democracy. This was a concept that Cristina has used before in previous publication, and that I had used as well in other publications previously. And when the book of Reloaded Democracy of Cristina was presented a few years ago in the UK, a very nice presentation, there was this discussion about what is the meaning of laboratory of democracy? What is the meaning of this? And what are the main features of this laboratory? And what are the impacts? There were all the concepts that constantly were discussed in this seminar, if I remember this well. So Cristina and I, we tried to recover almost all the literature that we knew from 15M. And we spent a lot of hours reading the literature of 15M. Please forgive us if we have forgotten something, but I think we tried to do a good job of reading most of the work of the last 10 years on the case of 15M, and analyze and seeing the reflections and the analysis on the impact of this movement in different arenas. And the concept of impact, normally this is a public discussion when you think if 15M was a failure or not. Sometimes you hear some reflections in the direction of, look, 15M was a failure. It was not a real change. Nothing has changed in the last 10, 12 years. And we thought, well, that's a little bit too simplistic. I think we thought that the concept of impact is very complex, and that we can address or look in different arenas. And that actually the literature of the last years is showing us this. So our goal, and please, Cristina, correct me if I'm wrong, was to analyze this and to see in different aspects on, for instance, the influence on the public opinion that had 15M, very especially at the beginning. A bit later, the impact on the electoral landscape as well, and with the new political platforms. How 15M and different platforms have been trying to create new parties or different kind of parties or movement parties. And at the same time, how different democratic innovations have been introduced in institutions. So we thought that there were, I'm only saying a few examples, but different arenas of action and where 15M had an impact. And I think the special issue shows this. I mean, the presentations of Carlos, Fabiola, Patricia, Lucia shows this, and now a bit more optimistic. Germán shows the impact as well on the other side, obviously, on what is the reaction from the state. But there was a little bit the purpose of this article. And please, Cristina, add more information on the paper.
Thanks, Ramon. No, you did a great job. I mean, basically, it started off as a conceptual paper to try to encourage people to expand their thinking when they think about the impact of social movements on democracy, and not just think about the institutional arena. That's super important. But there's other ways that social movements impact democracy that don't necessarily go through institutional channels. So that's what we're trying to do in the article. Great. So now that we kind of have a bit of an understanding of the different perspectives and the research that's gone on in the issue, I wanted to start with some questions. 15M was a political earthquake in Spain. Absolutely. No question about it. And looking back at that time, I wanted you to tell us what were some of the expectations, demands, or hopes that stand out for you that activists and participants in the movement were developing together in the squares and the spaces of the movement. And maybe also we could capture some of the emotion for that, for people who weren't living that political earthquake at the time. Does anybody want to start in particular, or should we just go around the same list? Is that Carlos, do you want to start?
Yeah, why not? Apparently, I am optimistic, even if I am from Galicia, so I take the word. Yeah, I think the main emotions were related to, of course, to a kind of collective desire for democracy, right? A desire of encounter or of being together, and of course, an updated and renewed democracy for everyone, a democracy for everyone. All those ideas of participation and collaboration, care, transparency, horizontality, imagination, you know, of course, the joy of 50M or the 15M also stem from, also reach from disenchantment, no, from pain, from a kind of grief, the crisis, the stories we have been told, la transición, the two-party system and its pacts of oblivion and silence, political corruption and bank fraud, unemployment, housing, a feeling of a no future feeling, I guess. So it's difficult for me to sum it all up now.
That's great. Fabiola.
Yes, thank you. I was thinking about this issue. Probably what when I remember, especially the Acampada Sol in Madrid, the strongest feeling is well, it was highly emotional. But I think what most the most amazing was the feeling of equality, you know, equality among everybody, taking part in you know, small groups talking about a specific issue. I remember an assembly about public education or housing and so on. It was a feeling of everyone is, you know, the same. I mean, we are this, equals. And also the feeling of empowerment, of citizen empowerment. I think we felt very powerful, very powerful. Yeah, I think it was a well, fantastic feeling, no, shared feeling, no,
yeah,
among the people. Yes, and I had another idea in my mind, but sorry, I forget it. Maybe later I can add something. Sorry.
German, thanks, Fabiola.
Yes, thanks. So despite this gloomy paper, my previous research on the 15M was more positive. And I remember this research that we did in the acampadas in Salamanca. It was my first encounter with the Movimiento 15M. And that was a very interesting experience because I took my graduate students and we were together so to try to understand what was going on, because a number of people, of course, lived and slept in the acampadas for quite some time. And we wanted to find out what happened with them. And I remember that I mean, what we learned from that experience is that reconnection was the most important word that appeared in that time, but not just a recognition with politics, no, because the Movimiento 15M developed into a political force, and then they developed these arguments about the quality of democracy, etc. But what we found in observing and talking to people in those assembleas was that people really needed to reconnect with one another and actually to reconnect with their own political voices. No, there was a lot of learning of people. So as Cristina suggested, so emotions were very important. This is something that I learned very quickly. So people realized that they wanted to do something with the frustration that at the beginning was not very well defined, I think. And then there was this urge to connect with other people, to try to, again, this classical theme of belonging, no? That actually goes against individualization. So there was a lot of recognition with one another, recognition with their own personal voices, and also recognition with politics, no? That they try to redefine and recognize and reconnect with a better understanding of politics. This is what I mostly remember from that time.
Cool. Lucia.
So when I was thinking about the questions you sent us, let me say first that we were also preparing some workshop for a feminist economic conference. So many of my thoughts have been developed in dialogue with Amaya Pérez Olorco, Lucía Gómez, and Astrid Ajenjo Calderón. And that's something I would like to stress. And thinking about these issues, let's say, first of all, in a more collective way, we were thinking about 4 kinds of powers that were in place in the 15M, no? The first one was the possibility to denunciation of discontent, no? This idea de lo llaman democracia, it no lo es, no? How it was being from the outset, from the economics and politics, no? This connection. The second power was the rebelling against the control society, no? This contradiction of the lack of supervision of big capitals. No, we break the fear. Infeme breaks the fear in a way. This idea de sin casa, sin trabajo, sin pensión, sin miedo, no? This idea. I'm sorry for the non-Spanish speakers, no? That we without a home, without a job, without a pension, without fear, no? The third power was the this idea that this conflict, capital life, is not a theoretical issue, no? It's not an abstract tension, but something that we live in concrete life of concrete people, no? So having this point to the commons is not a place that we aspire, is a place from which we construct. And the fourth power was taking the bodies and with the vulnerability to the streets, not the precariousness at the center, this break of the boundaries between the public and the private space when we were, many people were living together, sharing a space, a square, for example. From my own memories, well, I must confess that I was an 8-month pregnant woman during the May 2011. So my experience was a little bit from the rearward, no, in a way. But what I could see, for example, was the put into practice of a new generation of feminist collective and movement in Seville. In that experience on Seville, of course, there were some very strong autonomist feminist collective and groups, but no doubt that Zetas Feministas, which was the feminist committee in Seville, make a new emergence of a new kind of feminism in the city.
Great.
And it was not easy to be feminist in 15M.
Yeah, in 15M. No, there was so much work that had to go into that. That's really, really important to recognize that it wasn't a given. It was something that was produced and constructed in those spaces very actively and against a lot of resistance. Cool. Patricia, do you want to?
Yeah, I would just build on the first Lucia's argument. I think it was the first one. This idea of liberation from several frustrations, because we came from several years of negation of economic crisis, growing steadily of all unemployment rates and everything, and that was a break. So we need a sort of liberation from several frustrations, and I think that was the first emotion that totally emerged everywhere. And more personally, I just started my academic life in 2011. So it was suddenly many people was interested in protest, and that was wonderful because before that, as far as I remember, and also as far as I was working at university a couple of years, protest was not so popular. It was a sort of very marginal thing. So suddenly many people were interested in those topics. So that was nice.
Thank you. Y Ramon?
Well, yes, it's a good question. I think on a personal level, for me, the thing I remember the most is well, the camps were already important in Madrid and Barcelona, but then it, as we all know, it expanded to other cities. And there was a call as well in Castellón. Castellón is a very nice place, obviously. It's my place. For me, it's the best place in Spain. But it's not very active from a political point of view. And there was a demonstration. And I mean, we had a date and an hour, and we were there, I think, 20 minutes before the demonstration was officially going to start. And there was no one in the square, or very few people. We thought, oh, Jesus, again, no one. Again, Castellón is going to be not active politically now that we are witnessing this in Barcelona, Madrid, and other places. But then it was, I remember it was at 7, and people from all places started to come, very different people. Some of them you knew from other movements from before, but then a lot of students, people from different ages, and it was amazing. I mean, the feeling was amazing. I think what Patricia was explaining before about the memories, I mean, I think it's something no one that was there is going to forget. I mean, it was a real nice feeling, and it was not only that day. I mean, it lasted for a few weeks, and there was a lot of discussions. It was very interesting to witness this as a person, as an activist, and at the same time, it has a big impact on our academic field. Patricia was saying that she started at that moment, and I just defended my PhD a few months ago. Before that. And I did a theoretical work on civil society, and people said, what is civil society? And then when 15M started, it was much easier to look, this is a civil society. It was much easier to understand why is needed a theoretical work on civil society, social movements, and so on. But going a bit more on our paper, I think one aspect which is very interesting for 15M is that the emotions that Fabiola was saying, Lucia as well, and Carlos and Kerman, the emotion played a very important role. But what is unique is that these emotions lasted for a very long period. I mean, we had this in 2011 with the acampadas and so on, but on a different scale and not exactly the same, but emotions were very important as well on the municipal platforms. So I think that this is quite unique from 15M, and maybe one of the reasons that explain why emotions were constantly so important is linked to this idea of experimentation. People were experimenting, and they tried first one thing. If it was working well, if it was not working so well, they tried another one, then they tried another one. And I think that is one of the aspects that explain why 15M has lasted so long and with so many different initiatives. Sorry for such a long answer.
No, yeah, the laboratory element of it was in play very early on, of experimentation and trying things. Yeah, so looking back now on these emotions and the hopes and the demands, what do you think are some of the positive legacies? So we're leaving aside for a minute the more negative outcomes maybe, or some of the disappointments, but just thinking in terms of the positive legacies of 15M, and how do you think they continue to manifest themselves today? Maybe just some examples from each of you. Maybe we'll go backwards this time. Ramon, you start, and then I'll go backwards through the list. What are the positive legacies of 15M that you would say?
Well, I think very briefly that some elements are now in the public discussion that were not before. For instance, democracy in the political parties was something a bit strange. Now, even traditional parties are much more open to this. And this is just one of the examples. Lucia was saying this before as well. I mean, feminism and the topics and the discussions on feminism has changed a lot in the last 12 years, I think. But I'm not an expert on the topic, but it's now much more on the agenda, and there's much more awareness of the importance. And at the same time, and this would be the third thing I would like to mention, we look to corruption on a very different way now. And there is a stronger demand on transparency, and not only on political actors, but as well to other institutions from the state or even companies. And I think 15M had a role on that, at least to bringing this to the discussion.
Patricia?
Well, I think that clearly the protest repertoire, I mean, that it was not you know a lot about that. Maybe you can expand it, but it was not new in 2011. But demonstrations are like 15M ones, always. Even if you look at 8M marches or the pensioners or any mobilization, just copies the model, is copying the model of the 15M. So it seems that we don't go back before 2011, at least in terms of how mobilizations are organized now.
Okay, so much more widespread adoption. Yeah, yeah. It's kind of the development and expansion and diffusion of the 15M, 15mayismo, por decirlo así, ¿no? Lucia.
What we also did see this point of the Puerta and also the subjectivities, but Patricia mentioned in her first intervention, this idea of always in bracket feminization of politics, or the initial developments even of some policies that could be framed within a caring democracy in a specific spaces, maybe also a laboratory that could also be considered a laboratory. But and in addition to that, maybe I would highlight what I was saying before, no? This knowledge of the need, or this imaginary about the possibility for putting the economy back in the hands of politics, this possibility of identification and being rebel against neoliberalism and the disciplining neoliberalism, the understanding of the commons as a space from which depart, and this possibility of reconstructing the nexus between private and public, personal and politics, micro, macro, no? It's possibility of creation, social conflict from what are and were even more invisibilized spheres of life. And maybe all the movements also in relation to housework workers are a good example of this.
Of housework, say that again, the last bit, explain the last
workers, domestic workers, or
right.
housework workers, yeah, because the term is also contested. Right. No, it's not easy to decide, domestic worker or housework workers.
So that's they're saying that the positive legacy is that's become more visible, and mobilizations around that kind of labor.
Yeah, well, the mobilization, the possibility of creation social conflicts and social mobilization from invisibilized spheres, such as this, not only this, but such as this.
Right, okay, right. Great. German.
Yeah, very briefly, because I totally agree with Ramon and Patricia. No, and Lucia, I think she said that, because what I had written here was the production of possibilities. So I think, very broadly speaking, I really think that the big thing with this cycle of protest was the widening of the conversation about politics, about who can be the mayor and who could be a prime minister, and what are the topics that are legitimate, and the new approach to corruption, so I think it's the production of new possibilities in all walks of social and political life. So if we had, my headline would be something like that. Yes.
Fabiola.
Yes, I completely agree with what my colleagues have said. I would add something that Patricia highlighted before, probably the expansion of feeling of citizen efficacy in the public sphere. I think yes, not necessarily related to a better or more quality democracy, but yeah, the feeling that people have a voice and has the power to make hear their voice. in particular, local level, I think we still witness this new power, citizen power, regarding the perception of public space. Because you can see, you know, people is much more critical regarding municipal policies and political measures dealing with the privatizations of public terrace, of, you know, of public space, which are occupied with terrace and so on. Well, I think this could be a consequence, no, of this cycle of protest, and above all, of the reinvigoration of civic engagement, no, and citizen empowerment, no, as a consequence of the 15M movement.
That's super interesting. When I was researching for my book, Democracy Reloaded, I had an interview with a member of 15M Parrato. And one of the things that really struck me about that interview goes to something that you're saying. For them, the most important thing wasn't getting Rato in jail or in front of the judge or any of those things. The most important thing for them was transmitting to the people that they had power. And they also said that that's what was most important to them, and also the most difficult thing for them to achieve. So the hashtag, you know, la ciudadanía lo hizo, they were constantly trying to say, look, this isn't an elite who did this, or just a few of us who did this. This is something that's the citizens working together managed to do, right? And so that's a very interesting in relation to what you've just said about the positive legacy. But I think it's also something that was very actively produced and consciously attempted to be produced by a lot of activists in the movement. Carlos.
Yeah, I think, Christina, this is a really important question, in my opinion, because everything is like quickly forgotten, right? Even the good things, no, even the good things. And today, in this dark and blurry context, I don't know if perhaps it's more easy to be pessimistic or even a cynic one, right? But I think it's also important to remember the positive legacies, no? As much as they help to think us now and to act again, because if we did it once, we could maybe do it again, right? As much as they give, they take these emotions back between us. Sorry for going now a little off topic, but it's like the current debate around climate emergence and climate crisis, and we have these visions, more apocalyptical ones, about collapse and so on. That's quite important. I mean, we have objective data on the table to think about it and to be worried about it. But at the same time, these positions sometimes are kind of comfortable, because they just simply denounce and it gives everything impossible to act. So I think remember, these positive legacies can bring us again maybe this all that power that, as my colleague said, we have at that time, and 15M had at that time. No? So yes, I believe that 15M changed, transformed many things and many people. Today there's a new generation of politicians in the institutions. Laws have been passed, and concepts and ideas have been discussed that until recently were unthinkable in our country, beyond the activist field and beyond the social centers and beyond the assemblies and so on. So feminism, again, has taken an extraordinary relevance that did not have before the Indignados movement. And of course, outside expanding this idea of the political, outside the arena, the realm of the political liberal representation, we have many expressions, right? Many expressions that I think still remains. No? Social centers, associations, cooperatives, urban gardens, I don't know, publishing, communication, and artistic projects. All those learnings, no? I mean, the being together, digital knowledge, the management of infrastructures, of community organizations. So I believe that's still working in the present. Of course, the present is quite dark and I'm worried. I'm the first to be worried about it, but maybe in these past lessons, we can also think about it as lessons of the present to create maybe a future not so dark.
Yeah, and I agree with everybody. And I would just add one thing that hasn't really been mentioned, which is I think the development and expansion of critical independent media in Spain, I think, has been a huge legacy of 15M, and I think it's directly related. And actually, Ramon, we probably should have had that as an arena in our paper. I think we didn't, and it just is occurring to me now. That would have been an important one, but maybe we mentioned it and I just forgot. But yeah, I think that in such a mediatized world that we're living in, which is increasingly mediatized, right? I mean, it's just becoming more and more intensified, the importance of that. The ability to have a critical independent media that has enough of a following to be able to impact discourse and impact public opinion, I think is also a really important legacy of the movement, and one that we need to support and cherish very carefully, because it's, it takes support and money for that to continue. And if we don't do it, we're screwed, basically, right? Because we're going to be back to just hegemonic elite narratives permeating all aspects of society, and they already have obviously a huge amount of power. But so thinking about these periods of peak mobilization, we've talked about this imagining that anything is possible. That's such a common thing when there's a real peak of mobilization. Everything is new, everything is possible. There are lots of dreams and demands that come. And I remember 15M being really striking to me as somebody who's been involved with movements for a long time in Spain and in Madrid especially, because it was actually the first time I had ever seen any kind of mobilization that managed to bridge the cleavage between left and right in Spain, which is such a deep polarization that we've carried for so many years. And I mean, it didn't really last very long, right? But it was there. And I think it's easy to forget that it was there in the beginning. That real ability to kind of do what the Greens did in Germany back in the 80s, right? We're neither left or right, we're out in front. I think 15M really kind of channeled that kind of vibe. But of course, over time, that became a progressive movement. And then, of course, it kind of manifested in different ways, including, of course, institutionalization, where a significant part of the supporters of 15M and participants in 15M began to support electoral and partisan options, right? Either through municipalism or Podemos, and really put a lot of their energy into that. So I first just wanted to ask you what you feel were some of the most important post-acampada outcomes, like initiatives that came out after the acampadas in that first phase of the movement, and what some of the most significant outcomes have been, and what have they actually achieved? What do you feel that they've actually achieved? And maybe also, Fabiola, this might be of particular relevance for you as somebody who's studied, Ahora Madrid so closely. But maybe we start with Carlos this time and go back down the line. Carlos, what do you think the most important thing coming out after that acampada moment? Yeah,
precisely for me, I think that after the camp, 15M gained its greatest meaning and importance. Most, apart from that event, the big event of mediatic and communicative of creative of the camps too, of course, but landing in concrete and material situations, places and problems, right? El barrio, the asambleas de barrio, the neighbor, no? Housing or the city or the countryside, of health issues and education, putting efforts and action in food and in rent and housing. So practice that were involved and collective, of course, but concrete, and each one of them interrelated and interdependent in a kind of way. So, and just to put an obvious example that my colleagues know even probably better than me, but which already existed before 2011, but which since then Indignados has acquired an unprecedented public and sensitive and politic in all politic dimension, was the case of the PA, no? La plataforma afectados por la hipoteca, the platform of people affected by mortgages. Of course, let's not forget neither all the sectoral mobilizations of the mareas, of the tides again, public health, public education, and so forth. The experimentation, this concept of that Ramon was talking about before, this concept of experimentation, also with unionism, kind of social unionism. Some authors call it like unionism without unions. So that kind of experiences was related to singular everyday practices that affected particular and concrete situations and people. So I think there were that last until at least the end of 2014 or just the electoral term. So I think that we have many examples to answer that question.
Thank you. Fabiola?
Yes, I agree with Carlos, because actually I would highlight a similar outcome. I am thinking of the case of Madrid. What we have seen after the 15M camp lifted from Seoul, it has been a revitalization of civic associations, neighborhood organization. I think very important above all if we consider that since the 90s, there was significant decay of associationism, no, in general in Spain. Also, these associations are not necessarily as formalized as they used to be. In part, or it could be because younger people have entered these territorial networks, and this is another interesting point. I would say there has been a kind of territorialization of politics, no? Of politics in terms of the scale where people organize themselves, show their concern and mobilize politically. And I think this is a fundamental outcome of the 15M after the early stage of protest.
Herman.
To be honest, perhaps I will sound a bit simplistic, but I think from a more practical perspective, I think the more positive outcome of the Movimiento 15M is the very existence of Podemos. To be completely honest, we thought Podemos is living a really difficult time now, and with the complexities with the relationship with Sumar. But I think Podemos has been a wonderful force in Spanish politics with all the negativities and all the internal problems. But Podemos has recuperated a very old theme of defending a state intervention and protecting the most vulnerable people. And this is an idea that sounded so dated, and actually the Partido Socialista sometimes was very afraid of looking dated and opposing the means of the market. So Podemos has been a driver of recuperating these old conceptions of the state should be a shelter and should be protecting and should be redistributing. We recently saw this ruling by the Constitutional Tribunal saying that actually it's okay to actually not to finance schooling in Spain if they segregate by sexes, for instance, by gender. Well, this is an idea by Podemos. So there are so very many things that Podemos has introduced in contemporary policy making that actually somehow confirms that some of the big ideas of the Movimiento 15M found a way into contemporary politics. So the very transformation of housing into a policy domain. which is so contested. And then we have all these issues about property and all the conservative media trying to go back. But now we have a bad housing legislation, but we have housing legislation, and we are opening up the conversation about Spain catching up with Europe in terms of public housing, etc. So I think it has been a wonderful, with all the problems, and everybody knows them, but I think it has been a wonderful force in Spanish politics, and I think it's a direct outcome of the legacies of the spirit of the Movimiento 15.
Mm-hmm. And would you say that I mean, from my perspective, it also seems that Podemos does work in a way as a radical flank effect, right? Where PSOE is now actually saying, oh, well, they're making these progressive arguments. Maybe we should be making them too. Like, you know, they're trying to put the ese back in
Absolutely.
As Pablo Iglesias once said, or somebody said, oh, they're going to lose they've lost the E, they've lost the O, they're going to lose the S. Yeah, so that's a good to bring that back into the conversation. I think that's actually a really important point. Lucia, do you want to add anything of sort of significant achievements or outcomes of any of the post-acampada initiatives?
I was just going to add something to what Carlos and Fabiola was saying. No?
Yeah.
This decentralization, deterritorialization from the central main square to the neighborhoods, and the not necessary creation of the movement of collectives, but the re-energizing, or I don't know, revitalization, said Fabiola, and these initiatives were revitalized and were more visible after 15M, but I think they were also more connected. The different cities, not just, or maybe not necessarily only, or more within the same city, but also to other cities. So, for example, Carles mentioned the PAE, Movimiento de Afectados por la Hipoteca. It was created a few years between 2011, but obviously they were much more visible after 2011. And the connections between these movements and others were strengthened. And for example, in the case of feminist movements and feminist committees, there were so many dialogues between cities and between territories, exchange of ideas, exchange of practices, learning, this will of learning together from different territories. That was also important.
Cool. Patricia has had to leave because she had to go teach class. So Ramon, if you have anything to say in this regard.
Well, I think Carlos and Fabiola said what I was thinking. Actually, I would only maybe add one element, which is I think there were some experiments or some platforms that were very powerful monitoring the power relations or centers of power. You mentioned this before, Cristina. I think their XNet played a key role, 15 Parrato, later XNet, and all these actors, and especially in the years 2012, 13, they did a great job. They are still very active, obviously, but I think this was quite innovative in the Spanish context, and other platforms connected with this struggling in favor of transparency. And for the rest, I agree with what my previous colleague said. I would discuss a little bit Kerman conclusion on Podemos. I get the point of how important Podemos has been for introducing some issues in the political agenda. I agree on that. And I think Kerman has a strong point in that sense. On the other side, looking from the municipal platforms and having been active on the municipal level, I think Podemos has been a disaster and very problematic in how they structure the party, which is, I think, another element important from what we were asking. I mean, new political parties with new dynamics and new logics, and that was, I think, not so successful. So I agree on the aspect of the agenda, but I think we could organize a seminar only for discussing about how difficult it is to make a real new party, and now we have this discussion again with new platforms and with Sumar, Podemos, etc.
Well, that leads right into the next questions, because the next question is basically which of these initial expectations and demands do you feel were not achieved, and why not? I know that's a huge question, but what can we learn from some of the things that weren't achieved, and what went wrong somehow with that? So maybe Ramon, just carrying on from this position, if we think of the case of Podemos, what do you think, in a nutshell? Obviously, we could write 7 books about this, but what do you think really went wrong there in terms of channeling the spirit of 15M into some kind of political option, and then obviously what came after?
I think, especially in 2014, we were very optimistic with the idea of creating new parties, and many of those that were only doing street politics started to be involved in electoral politics, and the expectations were very high. And now we are in a very different situation, and I think there is still a lot to do. And there are people that say it's impossible to make a different party or a more democratic or transformative, or I don't know what concept to use, structure. But for me, that is the aspect that still needs a lot of thinking.
How to transform party politics?
Exactly. Yeah.
From the inside.
With a more horizontal, with this, you use this, Christina, in your work, this idea of vertical versus horizontal, how to make a vertical structure like a party much more horizontal. I think this is still a very difficult question.
Yeah. Lucia? What went wrong? Of the things that went wrong, what went wrong, and why did it go wrong as far as you?
Yeah, well, I think that's we need to see also this from nowadays, having in mind the pandemic context that we have been involved for the last 3 years now. Right. And that is something that we need to take into account. Here, maybe I will join this more pessimistic side of it, because I don't know if I previously mentioned, maybe not this idea, we were sleeping, we woke up, no? And maybe the question is, the point is that in a way we are sleeping again, no? And I think that something that has been lost is this capacity in general to look upward and to put the blame into those without upward, the hegemonic, the powers, and then how now the blame is put downwards, no?
Yep.
To the people who are more oppressed, migrant people, well, in general. And I think we have lost much of this. And this was maybe something that connected this break of the left, right possibility, this looking upward to find the way. And also, this doesn't mean that we didn't look also at our own incoherences. We were also looking at our own incoherences, but we were looking up, and now we are, many people, we are looking down, to put the blame down.
Kerman.
To be honest, perhaps I'm too honest in a seminar that is going to be recorded, but I really think that many of these political parties that came out of this social movement really lacked capable enough people to resist the temptations of institutional politics. So I think the challenges of institutional politics are there. So it has been a way of doing politics that actually it has its own dynamics, the temptations to do this, to actually to forget all the theory about consensus and participation and pretend that you are participating, but at the end of the day. So I totally understand the benefits of doing the old way, and to try to resist the logics of party politics and institutional politics. You really need, I think, a strong personal and epistemological abilities. And I think in most of the people that actually transformed into politicians really lack them. Perhaps none of us have them. But actually, I think it was a question of people not being able, not having the capacities to really to resist the traditional ways of participation in parliaments or being in local governments. So what went wrong? Well, the people that actually went into the electoral list at different levels couldn't really resist the temptations of doing the old ways. This would be my answer.
Mm-hmm. But when you see that's an interesting use of the word temptation. What do you think they're being tempted by? Just belonging to the club,
Yeah,
the elite belonging to the powerful, doing things the way, you know, the cool kids because they have the car and the ministerial whatever. And
well, dealing, I mean, getting into this idea of the compromises, no, that theoretically, I mean, the social movement and activists, I mean, you know that better than me, are not very happy with compromises, no, because principles are very important and ideas are so strong. So the very idea of a movement party is to try to project these very strong ideas and, about things and to transform politics by being strong in your commitment to ideals. But then you see institutional politics that tell you, well, no, it's el arte de lo posible. Actually, you have to negotiate, that you have to think for the better good and things like that. So I think this is a huge temptation for anyone in politics, and it's very difficult to resist that temptation. And also this logic of back deals, no, of not being totally transparent about your preferences or trying to, well, theoretically Podemos and other movements of this, parties of this family were supposed to be very transparent about the projects and the claims and the way of doing politics, but then we are finding out that they are doing the old way of doing back channeling and not showing every information and things like that. So this is what I mean by temptation, that it's very difficult actually. Whenever you are in a big organization, you feel how difficult it is really to be open to the public all the time. You really cannot be honest all the time, but you have to reach compromises. And I think they are doing that perhaps, but perhaps they should have resisted this way of doing politics. That's my point.
The force of institutional political logics are too strong to really. Maybe that's a fundamental contradiction between sort of movements and parties that can't be overcome, or maybe it can be. Fabiola, what do you think? Do you think is there a way? Is there a way around this? Is there a way?
I think there is no any good way. Yes, well, I think, in my opinion, if a movement intends to have a lasting impact on institutional politics, playing the game of democracy, of institutional politics, it needs to institutionalize necessarily. Because otherwise, what we find, and I think it was the outcome of the 15F movement, what we see is different experimentations, but moving between two extremes. Or the autonomous tradition, as you tell in your book, the autonomous tradition, which led to I would say hyper leadership. It was the case of Ahora Madrid with Manuela Carmena, or on the other side, or on the other extreme, we have Podemos with Pablo Iglesias. So in my opinion, neither of these options are convenient and are a guarantee in order to make a lasting impact in institutional politics. Yeah, I think I would say that was the main problem. It was an underestimation of the role of institutionalization of the movement.
And maybe also, I mean, I think I think the persistence of the importance of charismatic leadership in Spanish politics is really, really a crucial thing, and something that maybe we underestimated. Because if you look at everything that's come out of the ones that were successful, they are really around charismatic leadership. Pablo Iglesias is very charismatic.
Yes.
Ada Colau is very charismatic. Manuela Carmena, in her own way, is very charismatic and has a following, right? Just to mention a few of them. And maybe some of the replacements haven't been quite as charismatic. And I think that's maybe what we're seeing now with the rise of Yolanda Díaz instead of Ione Belarra, who I think is a very competent and capable politician. But we are again seeing Sumar come up with this charismatic leadership. It's all about Yolanda Díaz, right? I mean, I don't know what it represents other than Yolanda Diaz, you know what I mean? Like, so that's a really interesting, and I don't know how much that is a function of our political culture in Spain and the political traditions of leadership, or, you know, if it's something to do with our national political culture, or if there's something else that we could do to make that not the case, you know, not it to be all about the top person. And media obviously has a lot to do with that, but that's a real challenging scenario. Carlos, do you have anything you want to add to that discussion we see?
Yeah, I would like to add like two things related to one of the two last questions. About the first one, maybe more idealistic, about things that they either weren't achieved or that went wrong, and the other related to Podemos and to dialogue also with my colleagues. Well, we can come back a little bit. So 50M, at least in their discourses, wanted to change everything. That's never easy, nor probably realistic, and nor does it have to be. So in this way, I will just comment one thing. There was a slogan that I really liked at the time, and that, of course, realpolitik would soon remind us that was very naive and far removed from serious politics. And this slogan was, let's go slowly because we are going far, no? Vamos despacio porque vamos lejos. In this moment, I kind of miss personally, I'm talking personally as a symptom of democratic health. That slow time of the conversation, the public conversation that my colleagues talk about before, the slow times of the squares, not as a material practice, because the camps, of course, could not last longer than they did, but yeah, but the kind of that kind of exchange, of encounter, again, of discussion, of collective thinking, of creating knowledge and practices and ways of doing and caring and relating to each other. So soon everyone thought that they had like kind of already obtained their own quick answers to complex problems. Once the answer of their party, or even the new politics or the new party. Others, the answer of identity or of ideology, of the pragmatism, electoral logic, and las máquinas electorales, and so on. So, of course, the situation we live, as I said before, it's urgent, it's critical. But if we don't, I really think if we do not return to that collective and careful art of question and reflections, if we do not return to that, to that power of anyone's and creating alliances with among these divergences, as Fabiola said before, I believe that the answers we will give to current and very problematic questions, energy crisis and climate emergence, war, fascism, and so on, will remain very fragile. And second question is related to Podemos. I understood what Kerman said before. I kind of agree, but I need also have the need to separate in a certain way Podemos from 50M. Of course, because 15M is one thing and Podemos is another. Of course, one cannot be understand without the other, no? At least not when we make a chronological analysis of the events. But for instance, Kerman was talking about how Podemos materialized that this important of the state. Of course, I don't deny that, of course, but that state turn that put the state in the center again after that long period of alter-globalism and alter-mondialization, even in the own repertoires or demonstration repertoires of 15M, was the state the main interrelated agent with which negotiate and with which reclaim, as my colleague said before. But that was the 15M who put that on the public arena, no, on the public domain. And that was the reason, because that's explain how the demonstrations, many demonstrations were directed were placed physically in front of the parliament, in front of the city councils, in front of all that institution that a decade ago, sometimes apparently we thought that they were lost. No, the state, we were always talking about transnational stuff, but this national, territorial, and state term was already in the squares, was already in the practice and discourses of the Indignados. No. But as I said before, of course, Podemos is like kind of, we cannot explain Podemos without 15M. Personally, I think that right now there is little left to link them. I mean, more than some faces, some ideas, and some practices, of course. With that electoral turn, logically, as my colleagues explained before, Podemos is forced to function as another party structure. Of course, let's put it clear, no todos los partidos son iguales, no? Not all parties are the same. I think that is a comforting fallacy of those who want to simply nothing more than cynical and keep their positions of power and were uncomfortable criticisms. Right? Podemos has done and has caused in a few years things that were unthinkable for decades in our country, in Spain. But it has not done that alone. Without everything that 15M cultivated before, that climate, that sensibility, that conscience, it would not have been possible. And in fact, the own Pablo Iglesias, even when he was on the government, recognized that that institutionalization that Fabiola was talking about can nothing by itself without the streets, without the power or the movement, without that society and movement. You can be really institutionalized, but if you don't have people to negotiate with, people to push, people to move you even forward of your possible relationship with the world, it won't last. It won't last. No? So in the end, I think institutional logics entail reproducing what they also criticize. You know? Strong leaderships, as Cristina said before, that speed against that vamos despacio, no? And more a struggle of position that the struggle of stories, of imagination, what kind of world, what kind of society we want to create together. No? That was in the everyday of the plaza. So yeah, I agree with my colleagues, but I think that sometimes we put together things that are, of course, historically and chronologically linked to each one to another, but sometimes we need to remember some specificities of each one.
Yeah, I think just if I can say something as well, I think we underestimate the role of social movements, activism in Podemos' initial success. And I think Podemos forgot or underestimated. I think they thought that because Pablo Iglesias was on the TV all the time and there was an ability to kind of jump over the movements and go straight to the people, right? Like that with Plaza Podemos, with all of that. And what you see though is obviously there were other factors affecting the declive de Podemos, no? The decline of Podemos in terms of its electoral thing. But I think a lot of that was not recognizing that you needed to bring the movements with you in a much more important way. And they didn't do that. And I think that explains a lot of where they are today, because I think the movements were crucial in so many ways that we perhaps don't recognize. We have a tendency in social movements to think that there's a movement and then part of it becomes institutionalized and then it becomes professionalized and then that kind of takes on a life of its own. But there's a relationship there, right? And especially if you're talking about hybrid parties, there's a relationship. And that's something that the right hasn't forgotten, right? The right is very good at keeping those movements alive and thriving and with them. And yet the progressive movement parties, I think, have forgotten that. But speaking of the problems that you were talking about before, I'll just have a couple more questions and we can wrap this up. But we're obviously facing a really complicated political scenario across Europe. We have the rise of the far right. We have mainstreaming of far right positions in many cases where center rights are actually speaking as if they were far right or have become far right. We obviously have global pandemics. We have global crises like climate a change. We've got a war raging on our doorstep, which again has opened up a lot of conflict between progressive actors about whether, how should we respond to this aggression and invasion of Ukraine by Russia. And so I wanted to ask each of you, are there any lessons from 15M that we should take and we should remember and we should kind of put back on the table that might help us face more effectively or positively these new challenges that we're facing now? Carlos, you want to start, and then I'll go back down the other direction.
Yeah, of course.
Are there lessons that we can really take?
Yeah, if I move back with of course, I'm talking by myself, but I'm talking because of the common work of many colleagues, and especially Bryce Estevez from the University of Santiago and the Compostela, and Raquel Martinez from my own university, whom I work in this paper. If I come back to these practices of the mutual support groups, mutual aid groups in the lockdown, in the pandemic, maybe we can think also about the last thing that you say, Christina, about this relationship between formal institutions and informal, if we want to use that terms, or if between parties and between movements, because in these mutual support groups, all the participants, as I said before, they were really divergent. They were really different. Even sometimes they were in their previous biographical or activist capital story were confronted, but before a scenario real common in their threat, and they put their alliances, they create an alliance, and they put to work together. So maybe to think social movements today in this scenario also implies to redefine or to blur the boundaries between institutions and non-institutions, because it's not an institution the work of the PA or the social center. I know that is a kind of polemic and probably provocative question, no? But they create also norms. They create they transform reality at some kind, no? Of course, in a more little dimension. But I mean, we have to maybe to rethink from this specific work of this research about mutual support groups. We can rethink or get to know that these frontiers, these borders are more blurry than we thought. So what we postulate in this paper indeed is the mutual support groups that appear during the lockdown, of course, in particular in the city of A Coruña, find their inspiration in the 50M. Many of their gestures and symbols and sensibilities and even protagonists had been present in the previous wave of indignation, both in the streets and both in the formal institutions. As I said before, in our case, in the Marea Atlántica, this municipalist party movement, and others are not. And this is just as interesting, if not more, no? New generations, as generations of people who made part of this alliance, of this group of mutual support. So if we understand social movement as knowledge producers, and if we understand them as this socio-material articulation that can operate as memory devices, not related to what my colleague said before, and that give previous learning for society, then these neighborhood support networks for us seems to be clearly errors of those years of experimental political and democratic experimentation. Together, the joint and materialized in concrete practices, a new use of technopolitics, because now, Christina, of course, you are right. The right not only knows how to articulate the movements, but now has practically the monopoly of this that 1 decade ago the left had, no, this technopolitics in this new world of algorithms and big data and so on. So remembering for me and for us, I think it's a political act, especially in our country as in many others. And those lessons learned from the 50M, if they are remembered, as I said before, in practice, not a kind of nostalgia or remembering, but in practice, renewed, grounded in concrete and specific issues and problems and threats in this present world, can continue to inspire, I guess, forms of collective action today in the present, putting the bodies in the center, putting the lives and care in the center, caring for human and non-human entities now, because we also in this kind of in this world completely threat ecologically, you have to also understand social movements interrelated with many other entities and agents. That's my point of view. So yeah, I'm putting, of course, democracy in the center to giving meaning to our life in common in this uncertain times and this uncertain future that we have alone.
Cool. Fabiola, any lessons we should be taking?
Yes, I think so. Especially, I would say the most important lesson, in my view, would be to keep a movement inclusive, an open movement open, because I think this entails an extraordinary strength when it comes to compete with another social movements, which are defined on the basis of narrow identities and narrow interests. In my view, this is the most important lesson that the 15M movement can teach us to face the challenges we are in front of us. Inclusiveness and openness.
German.
Well, I think, I mean, if we did this experiment of trying to imagine an 15M movement activists and trying to try to give some advice to contemporary activists, I would identify a positive advice and a more negative one. I think on the positive side, I think a 15M activist would say, don't worry, there is a lot of mobilization potential, no? If we can recuperate this idea. I think the Movimiento 15M demonstrated that there were new classes of citizens, of people that could be mobilized. So there was not a question of pertaining to a minority or being strongly connected with an issue, that there were new possibilities, emotional references, and actually everybody really can be mobilized in this horizontal, complex, globalized world, no? So actually there is possibility really to defend all kinds of causes, and this is something that I think we've learned from the Indignados. And on a less positive note, I think an activist from the 15M movement would say, try to invent or incorporate a lot of technical expertise, particularly in relation to the law and relation to all kinds of technical things, the media, coordination, management, and profiling, and particularly the law. So something that the Indignados movement learned the bad way was that the complexities of repression, the complexities of legislation, actually instantly, as you very well know, these assemblias in Madrid developed this Comisión Legal Sol, so it was very obvious for them that the legal expertise was going to be very relevant, and is becoming more relevant because the problem of repression is a global problem, and so very many countries are stepping up in new forms of legislation that are actually limiting the scope for dissent. So it's not really a Spanish problem, even though, as you can see, Cristina, I'm using the opportunity to talk about my book. So even though we have the Spanish issue of brutal repression and using civic local regulation to try to impose fines, so it is very, very much a Spanish thing, but the problem of the limitations of dissent are a global problem, and actually there are so many new legislation in American states, so actually it's a horrible issue, so everywhere. So this is very obvious, I think, for activists, that emotions are important, and connected with the grievances are important, but forms of activism today should incorporate or develop forms of technical expertise that will be very, very useful, I think.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I agree 100%. Lucia.
Yeah, well, I was going to mention one thing that it's maybe connected, but from a different way with what Karma just said. My very specific point was this reinforcing or reinforces this linkage between academia and activists from the other side. No, there was this strong moment of connection that has been lost. I think the academia has also phagocytated a lot of the knowledge produced by social movement, by 15M movement, and I think it's a way to reopen it. And I would like just to share a very quick example. We had just a few months ago, in February, at the Feminist Economic Conference in Barcelona, which of course was, well, it was an interesting point. It was a very contested conference from the beginning of its design. Also because of the participation of the institution. Ada Colau was in the opening. It was great having her there, but also it was very, very contested. There were some uncomfortabilities, but suddenly it was retaken by parts of social movements, which many of us thought would be excluded in that specific conference because they have not been maybe so explicitly invited. However, we found out that they were there and they were claiming this space. And it was a great learning. And a new face I think a new face has also been open from Spanish and Latin American feminist economic. And that's interesting because we thought that was lost, that we have lost this space on the conferences. And it was not. It's just a different thing, yeah.
Cool. Ramon.
Yes, to be honest, I don't know if I have a good answer for this complex question.
It's a hard question.
It's a hard question. And
what can we learn from this experience that might help us today? What should we remember of the lesson? What lessons have we learned, if any?
Well, I think that maybe in order as well to share a little bit the special issue in this case. I mean, 59 was important for reimagining or rethinking democracy, right? I mean, the topic of what means democracy, how should democracy work, what means political participation, what is a political repertory was crucial in 2011. And now that I am a little bit more pessimistic, or much more pessimistic, due to reasons that my colleagues have explained very well as well. Maybe we have to recover a little bit this question. I mean, what do we expect from democracy? How could we deepening democracy? There have been some interesting experience going on using sortition, on using processes of monitoring, of developing the direct ways of deciding things at local level, together with the other elements or experience that my colleagues have been explaining. So maybe one lesson is how we keep this question open and how we introduce it now that we are in a more pessimistic moment, and in a moment where the far right is much more mobilized, which was not the case of 2011. So that's a little bit my ideas.
Great. I think I've been monopolizing the question making. I have so many more questions I'd like to ask, but I think at this point I will ask you, do you guys have any questions for each other? And then of course we can also ask people who are listening to us if they have any questions as well. But I'll just start and see if any of you have a question you'd like to ask each other, or if you would like us just to open to the participants if they have any questions for us.
I would have a quick question to Fabiola. It's just a personal curiosity, but do you think that Más Madrid and other similar political parties are learning from the mistakes of Ahora Madrid, or do you think there is a process of learning, of trying to evaluate the experiences of Ahora Madrid when facing local elections and local government, or they are disconnected from their immediate past? What do you think?
Well, that's a very good question. I think Más Madrid is not Ahora Madrid, not at all. They are a different political project. So the problematic involved in organizing a citizen platform such as was Ahora Madrid is not the same problem. Okay, so they have learned, yeah, of course they have learned. I would say that that's why in 2019 they became a different electoral candidacy, leaving behind the experiment of Ahora Madrid. keeping this similar name, yeah, Mas Madrid, they wanted to give it a continuity, so they can claim, and I think it's true, that their origin is in the mobilizations and the protest cycle of the 2011. But I think they are not the same political project. First of all, they are different political projects, and it's very interesting because nowadays, I confess, it's a mess. It's a mess. No, for instance, when Ahora Madrid disappeared or was going to disappear, there were two competing electoral candidacy, let's say parties. Our Mas Madrid, with Manuela Carmena leading the project, and another party which was the consequence of the Ahora Madrid government split, with the Sanchez Mato, and he used to be the economic counselor, not counselor for economic affairs, and this this new party local candidacy was much more on the left, clearly, no, on the left tradition than Ahora Madrid. But after all, nowadays, Ahora Madrid and Sanchez Matos coalition support Sumar with Yolanda Díaz leading this project. So that's why I say it's difficult, no? It's kind of a mess, no? The relationship, the supports and fighting against one another. But to summarize, I think, yeah, they have learned of the past experience, but they are different political projects. I would say they are very different political projects. I don't know if I've answered your question.
Yeah, Cristina, if I may, I would love to ask some questions to my colleagues too. If they're happy time, yeah. One will be for Kerman, because and the question will be like, when we talk about technologies of repression, as they do in their paper, nowadays, I mean, 1 decade after the 15M, what relationship do you find, or what do you think are the main threats of this repression, the technologies of repressions today, like all these last 10 years of digital, manipulation of digital presence of our right, and of course all the algorithmic culture and all this culture of the filters. And how's your opinion about technopolitics that 10 years ago seemed really optimistic, and now of course we have to be much more prudent, no? And the other question will be for a question for Lucia about the relationship between the 8th March and the feminist movements today, and with this new public and political presence of Vox, no, of the extreme right. I mean, what do you think is the I don't know how to express that, but well, what are the threats for the feminist movement with all this presence of the far right in the already recognized as political and official representation parties? And thank you very much, and congratulations also Fabiola and Ramon, of course, Cristina, for your works.
Germán, ¿quieres empezar? You
very briefly, because I know it's quite late. Perhaps I should be more clear, because when we use this expression of the technologies of repression, we are not just focused on the technologies of surveillance, of the technologies of policy. So we're trying to convey, perhaps not clearly enough, to try to convey that repression is a modular thing that combines different mechanisms, different ways of repression. So there is a strategy, and it's combined through different means. So and from our perspective, I think the most pervasive and dangerous element of the repression regime is soft repression, brutal repression. I think this is what causing the most damage, because actually it has these consequences of delayed effects, because, well, you don't know what the fines are going to come, and actually because it is very individualizing, that there is no possibility very often to seek out for help, and then the fine comes to your destination, to your location after 3, 4, 6, 7 months, and perhaps you are not in connection with the members of the community. So actually you face very likely the fine, and actually this is causing a horrible psychological reaction that has been already researched in the American context, that people are just focusing on the super legal forms of mobilization in case something that you are doing that perhaps is perfectly legal would invite some sort of fining. And there are news coming up from Madrid nowadays, because there is a very flexible use of legislation against protesters. So I think this is the biggest worry. And surveillance is a problem. Something that came up in our interviews was like probably the police and the state has a lot of information about certain types of protesters that actually, and the state displays this information in a very free way. For instance, the situation of one of our interviewees, that he wanted to renew his passport and in a different location from Salamanca, actually, and the policeman on the other side of the desk said, "Oh, you had these problems and that you participated in these protests." And the guy said, "But how do you know? And why are you saying that to me in front of my..." So there is a lot of, and activists are very worried about this sort of buckets of information that could be used. So I think surveillance is a big issue, but from our perspective, soft repression, brutal repression is really the big danger, actually eroding and limiting the capacity for mobilization nowadays.
Yeah, I would agree. Yeah. Lucia.
Thank you, Carlos, for this, for your question and your ideas. Yeah, because maybe I haven't highlighted enough, and I'm becoming aware of that from my perspective, the energy and the potential of the feminist movements and feminist mobilization over the last few years, both at the international, but maybe specifically at the national level, are one of the process maybe in which the echoes of the powers of the 15M can be more clearly seen. And we were talking before about the emotion we all feel when we meet the demonstration on this 15 May, on 2011, but maybe many of us felt the same on 2018 at the 8th of March marches and demonstrations, because we didn't expect it, and we found again with huge demonstration, and that's an important issue. So I think that much of the knowledge, much of the experiences, much of the discontents have emerged again in these feminist movements, initiatives, ways, and so. And concerning what you were also to the table about the box policies and box discourses, and so I think it can be read as a counter-revolution reaction, clearly, that it's seen, of course, at this institutional level, but it also seen at the more domestic and family and social level, with the increasement of gender violence and different forms of gender violence, which are also increasing.
Okay, I think we've been talking for quite a while. We're probably tired, hungry, and needing to wrap this up, even though I would love to continue chatting. Maybe we can do this in person sometime and get together and have another one of these in Spanish, so our brains to be a little easier for some of us. So I want to thank you once again. Thanks also to Ramon for doing the special with me, and all of you as authors and contributors, and of course not forgetting the other authors that weren't here today who also made such great contributions. The issue is out, and I did want to say one final thing. a lot of times people don't have access to the special issues or to social movement studies. This is something we have no control over, but we want to remind you that authors are always have a PDF, and they're very happy to send you a copy of their article. So if you have no access for whatever reason, please just write to the author and ask them for a PDF copy of their article, and they'd be very happy to send it to you. So we're allowed to do that no matter what the context that we're in. All of us are allowed to freely share our own work with people who are interested. So please bear that in mind, and we'll keep working to try to make as many free access things as we can, but we're very restricted by the actual way that this industry works. So thank you so much, each and every one of you, for joining today. I hope that you found it to be productive. I found it really fascinating. So thank you so much.
Thank you.